The Baltimore Orioles are right in this AL wildcard race because they keep beating the Blue Jays. And specifically, Ryan Mountcastle keeps beating the Blue Jays. And it's surprising a lot of people. But has the Orioles' success surprised their own front office as well? We'll break that all down coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, August 16th, 2022, and welcome back in to the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to start by recapping an Orioles victory as they beat the Blue Jays 7-3 on Monday night at the Rogers Center in Game 1 of a pivotal three-game series against the Toronto Blue Jays. I'll get you the 5 things you need to know from that one that included more dominance by Ryan Mountcastle against the Jays. Then we'll take a look at the Orioles as a whole, how surprising they've been to get to 60-55 so far this season, and why they haven't just surprised Major League Baseball. They haven't just surprised, frankly, us, the fans. Did they surprise their own front office by doing this, and how that has impacted maybe some of the decisions that have been made regarding this Orioles team so far in the second half? But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. And before we get to it, just want to thank you, the listener, for making Locked On Orioles your first podcast listen of the day. We're free and available on all podcast listening platforms, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you could leave a 5-star rating and a review on those apps, it really helps out the pod. And of course, we're here on YouTube as well, on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. We thank you all so much for getting us over 1,000 subscribers. And if you didn't listen or watch Monday's episode of the podcast, remember last week I said, Locked On Orioles on YouTube gets over 1,000 subscribers, we'll be doing a giveaway. Well, the giveaway is right here. And that's right. It is the Cedric Mullins 30-30 bobblehead. It can be yours in just 2 easy steps. Number 1, subscribe to Locked On Orioles on YouTube. And number 2, leave in the YouTube comments of either this episode or any of the 5 episodes this week your favorite moment that you've seen live at Oriole Park at Camden Yards in the 30 years it has existed. And if you haven't been to Oriole Park, that's okay. You could still perfectly be a fantastic Orioles fan. Leave us a comment with the favorite moment that you've ever seen on TV happen at Oriole Park, Camden Yards. I'll take all those responses after Friday, randomly draw a winner to win the Cedric Mullins 30-30 bobblehead. And again, thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first listen of the day. And for your first listen today, let's start with an Orioles victory. Orioles 7, Blue Jays 3 in Game 1 of a 3-game series in Toronto on Monday night, as the O's a big win in the wild card standings. With the victory, they move to 60-55 on the season. Blue Jays drop to 61-53. And unfortunately for the Orioles, the Yankees decided that they, even though they play in a Mickey Mouse ballpark, didn't want to score any runs on Monday night. So they lost to the Rays 4-0, which was unfortunate for the Orioles. As I am recording, the Mariners lead the Angels 2-1, and the White Sox have a 4-2 lead over the Astros in the 9th. The Twins lead the Royals 4-2 in the 9th. So other things around the wild card standings, not at all going the Orioles' way. But what they were able to do is come a little closer to Toronto. So they'll still be a game and a half behind both Tampa and Toronto, who are now tied at the moment for this potentially final wild card spot. But if there is a Seattle loss, the Orioles would be just 1 game back of the Mariners. But I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from the Orioles' 7-3 win over the Blue Jays. And the first thing you need to know, of course, is that Ryan Mountcastle just continues to haunt the Toronto Blue Jays. And, he had been in a pretty rough stretch in the second half of the season. And what got him out of that slump? Well, the 2 games that the Orioles played against the Blue Jays at Camden Yards last Monday and Tuesday, when Ryan Mountcastle just went off and the Orioles won both of those games. Well, they get back to Toronto here against the Blue Jays. And what does Ryan Mountcastle do? Well, he continues to hit. And this is after getting hit on the wrist by a pitch in Saturday's game. Because of that, he was out of the lineup on Sunday when the Orioles were almost no-hit by Drew Rasmussen. He re-enters the lineup Monday, and what does he do? Well, he homers against the Blue Jays, as he seemingly always does. It was a third-inning blast for Ryan Mountcastle, a two-run shot that put the Orioles up 3-0 at the time off of Blue Jays starter Yusei Kikuchi, and that ball was launched 109.3 miles per hour off the bat, traveled 417 feet to left field after an Anthony Santander two-out walk made it a two-run home run for Mountcastle, and it was his 14th home run in his career against the Blue Jays. In 32 games now against Toronto, Mountcastle has 14 home runs. He's hitting .360 against the Blue Jays, and he has a career 1160 OPS in his 32 games against Toronto. That is a ridiculous number for Ryan Mountcastle against the Blue Jays. And if you want to put the power in perspective, he's got 14 homers against the Blue Jays. The most he has behind that against any other team is 8 home runs against the Red Sox. And then he doesn't have more than 5 homers against any other team in Major League Baseball since his career started midway through the shortened 2020 season. I mean, this guy just dominates the Blue Jays, and it's awesome to see. Doesn't matter if he comes in a slump. Doesn't matter if he comes in after missing a day with injury. He just continues to hit this Blue Jays team and this Blue Jays pitching staff. And again, the home run was his only hit of the day for Ryan Mountcastle, but he also drew a walk in this game and ended up with a 1-for-3. Actually drew 2 walks in this game, I should say. 1-for-3 with the 2 walks, the homer, the 2 RBIs. Did strike out twice as well, but just mashing the baseball against the Blue Jays. Second thing you need to know from this one is that the other Ryan also had a big day for the Orioles, as Ryan McKenna picked up his first ever 3-hit game in his Major League career in this one. McKenna hitting in the leadoff spot in this game, getting the start in center field with the Blue Jays having a lefty in Kikuchi on the mound. Brandon Hyde once again choosing to sit Cedric Mullins against a left-hander. Cedric, who has been pretty putrid against left-handed pitching this year, despite being, really solid against righties, has not been good against lefties. A couple times Hyde has just hit him further down in the lineup against lefties. This time, though, he plays McKenna, who has been great against left-handers this year. And McKenna came through 3 for 5 with 2 doubles, an RBI, and a run scored in this game. All 3 of those hits, he had 3 hard hit balls on the day. His big RBI came in the big 3-run 4th inning for the Orioles, had an RBI double, and he put some good swings on the ball from that leadoff spot. And he did not get taken out of the game. There was not a point when, the Blue Jays went to the bullpen. They ended up bringing in 4 righties out of the pen after the lefty Kikuchi, and McKenna stayed in the entire game and faced some righties as well. And Cedric Mullins did enter defensively for Anthony Santander in the 9th inning when the Orioles closed it out, but that was all of the field that Mullins saw. McKenna played the entire game, just moved from center to left field defensively in the 9th inning, and that's big for him. Not only is it his first career 3-hit game, it's his first ever game with multiple extra base hits, as he had the 2 doubles on Monday night. And I got to say, don't look now, but Ryan McKenna's hitting .271 with a .718 OPS this year. Now, I wouldn't start him regularly over Mullins, Hayes, or Santander at this point, and I would still like to see Kyle Stowers come up and get his shot in the outfield. But Ryan McKenna is showing that he's maybe more than just a 4th outfielder, defensive replacement, pinch runner guy. He is hitting well, especially against lefties, and is turning into an offensive weapon for the Orioles. Third thing you need to know from this Orioles 7-3 win over the Blue Jays, we stick with the offense. And the O's offense working the count in this game and drawing some walks, which was really huge, especially after what happened on Sunday. Of course, the Orioles had Drew Rasmussen just dominating them in Tampa on Sunday. He took a perfect game into the 9th inning before Jorge Mateo broke it up with a leadoff double in the 9th. But the big thing with Rasmussen was he wasn't throwing any pitches. I mean, he was under 80 pitches through 8 perfect innings against the Orioles offense on Sunday. I think the craziest number was when he was through 5 perfect innings, he had thrown only 44 pitches to get through those 5 perfect innings. The Orioles were trying to attack the first pitch, weren't working counts, and it wasn't working out. Well, they certainly worked counts in this game. They drew 6 walks as a team, which, you compare it, they had just 8 hits in their 7 runs. They almost had as many walks as they had hits in this game. And, they did still strike out more than they walked in this ball game, ended up with 8 strikeouts, but the 6 walks is still, there's only been 3 games this year for the Orioles in which they have walked more than 6 times. They have 2 7-walk games, and they have 1 10-walk game, which was that crazy walk fest in April when they walked it off on a walk-off walk against Aroldis Chapman and the Yankees in extra innings. But 6 walks, a good number for the Orioles this year. They got 2 from Anthony Santander, 2 from Ryan Mountcastle, 1 from Jorge Mateo, and 1 from Terrin Vavra in this one. And I just like what I saw in the approach. And after their worst offensive game of the year on Sunday, they turned around and put up 7 runs. They got a lead early, 1 in the first, 2 in the third, 3 in the fourth, another in the fifth. Yeah, they did not score in the final 4 innings of this game, but they built themselves a big enough lead with their approach at the plate to come out with this win in Toronto. Fourth thing you need to know from this one as we turn to the pitching side is that Kyle Bradish, who got the start, was simply his usual chaotic self for the Orioles on the mound. His final line, he goes 4 2/3 innings, allowing 3 runs on 6 hits, strikes out 5, walks 4, allows a home run, throws 96 pitches and can't even finish the 5th. And now he did get squared up a little bit in this game, 8 hard hit balls against Bradish, now with a 6.38 ERA, but it's just wild to watch him pitch. I think the 3rd inning was really just the encapsulation of Kyle Bradish as a pitcher. He had thrown 2 scoreless to start the game. The Orioles had just gotten him the Mountcastle homer. O's leading 3-0 heading into the bottom of the 3rd. And what does Kyle Bradish do? Well, he starts by walking the number 9 hitter, Danny Jansen, on 4 pitches. Then the leadoff man for the Blue Jays comes up, and George Springer, he doubles. Then he gets 0-2 on Vladimir Guerrero and doesn't really throw any more pitches very close to the zone. Walks Guerrero, so bases loaded with nobody out. Then Lourdes Gurriel, a 2-run single up the middle, makes it a 3-2 game. And then all of a sudden, Bradish just locks in, strikes out Teoscar Hernandez. A pickoff error makes it 1st and 3rd with 1 out. And then he gets Bo Bichette to ground into a 6-4-3 double play to end the inning and keep the O's up 3-2. It was a wild, wild 3rd inning. Ended up giving up 1 more run on a Vladdy Jr. solo home run in the 5th, and then, let 2 runners on with 2 outs and did not get out of the 5th inning. But it's just real up and down. And again, it's 5 strikeouts, but it's 4 walks, and the stuff is super erratic. And, he only had 8 whiffs on the day on 39 swings, but 7 of those 8 whiffs came from the slider, which he threw a lot. 47 fastballs, 32 sliders, and then just 11 curveballs and 8 changeups mixed in. But the slider was working all day. The velo was up on that pitch. It sat, 87, 89 plus on the day. Looked good. The fastball was a little erratic at times. They didn't really know where it was going, but that's kind of the Kyle Bradish experience. I still believe in him as a guy for the Orioles, but right now he looks like just a 5 and dive guy, somebody who you hope you can get 5 innings out of him. He's going to throw close to 100 pitches in 5 innings, and you hope he strikes out enough guys and limits the walks to keep you in games. And that's who Bradish is right now. The stuff is good. If he figures it all out, he's going to be a great pitcher. That hasn't happened yet, but I still think he's one of the Orioles' best 5 options. So you keep sending him out there, and he keeps being chaotic on the mound for the Orioles. And the 5th and final thing you need to know from the Orioles' 7-3 win over the Blue Jays is that, well, after Bradish left the game, the Orioles bullpen simply did it again. And it was Brian Baker who was the first to come out of the pen. It's a 7-3 game, 2 on and 2 out in the bottom of the 5th, and Baker gets 1 pitch. Matt Chapman pops up to end the inning. Baker gets a 1-2-3 6th, ends up retiring all 4 batters he faced with 2 strikeouts. Then Dillon Tate had one of his better appearances of the season, an inning and 2/3 scoreless, 1 hit, 2 Ks, no walks, had that slider just dancing everywhere. Cionel Perez threw 1 pitch and got a ground out to end the 8th inning. And then Felix Bautista did allow a hit and a walk in the 9th inning, but got a 5-4-3 double play to end the game and secure the Orioles win. And that's what the O's bullpen has done all year. Bradish, wasn't great. Didn't get, super deep into the start, but Orioles bullpen gives them 4 1/3 scoreless innings to secure this win and get a little bit closer to Toronto in this AL wildcard race. But, the Orioles are certainly surprising the Blue Jays with how they've played them this year and how they've played really in general this year. I mean, the Orioles are now 5-2 against Toronto so far this season. They played really well against a really talented Blue Jays team. And they've not just surprised the Blue Jays, but the rest of the AL wildcard teams, the rest of the AL East. Heck, they've surprised the rest of baseball. They've surprised me. In no way did I think the Orioles would be 60-55 at this point. But there's also the question, Did they surprise their own front office? I don't think the front office thought, even in their wildest dreams, this team could be 60-55, but they are now. So how is that mindset and the initial plan from Mike Elias and his guys, how has that affected some of the moves that have been some head scratchers, some making more sense, but how has all of that impacted the Orioles' moves over the last few weeks? I'll try to break that down here coming up next. But first, got to tell you about Built Bar. And you know the original Built Bars, these protein bars covered in 100% chocolate, all the delicious flavors that Built has. You know, you've heard about them a lot on this podcast. But if you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. Are you ready? It's delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. Cookie dough chunk puffs are only 160 calories. They have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. They're the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. And of course, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. It means they're healthy and they're tasty. Just so delicious. So go to built.com right now to get your hands on the cookie dough chunk puff. And if you use the promo code LOCKEDON15, you'll get 15% off your order. Again, that is promo code LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off at built.com. So the Orioles beat the Blue Jays 7-3 on Monday night in game one of the 3-game series, and they continue to just shock the world this season. You know, a game and a half out of a playoff spot, 60-55, right there in the thick of the race in mid-August. Less than 2 months to go in the season, and the Orioles are right there. And it shocked a lot of us. But the question I wanted to look at here on today's episode really is, has it shocked the Orioles front office too? Like, how much has this team truly surprised Mike Elias and his staff? Because as we know from what the Orioles did this offseason, I mean, their biggest moves were signing Jordan Lyles and Rougned Odor. I don't think they quite expected to compete this year. They didn't add much to a team that went 52-110 in the 2021 season and had the worst record in baseball. Yeah, I think they knew they'd get Adley Rutschman and DL Hall and hopefully Grayson Rodriguez and some of these other prospects to the big leagues, and they hoped some of their younger players would take a step. I think all of us thought the Orioles would win more than 52 games. Heck, I even did predict that the Orioles would lose less than 100, but I don't think anybody saw them doing any better than maybe a 92-93 loss team, which would have been a great improvement from 110 losses, but still not anywhere close to a winning ball club. Well, here they are at 60-55 and are in a playoff race, and they are 3 wins away from securing they will not lose 100 games this season. They got their sights on something way better than just avoiding 100 losses. But when you look at what the Orioles have done recently, just with some of their roster moves and the way they've constructed these rosters, the way they have handled their prospects, it did make me kind of wonder, how much has this surprised Mike Elias? And not even just the season as a whole. Obviously with the rough start in April, the better May, and then the hot June, the hot July, and you get here. But even how the team is done post All-Star break and post trade deadline, because even if you were someone who was very optimistic on the Orioles and, thought they could make a run like this, you have to look at their roster compared to the rest of the rosters, especially in this AL wildcard race, and think, well, the Orioles are going to fall off the cliff at some point. At some point, they're going to have a long losing streak that's just going to take them out of this race. And instead, they've had winning streaks that have kept them in this race. Has it surprised Mike Elias too? And it may have. And I don't want to portray this as a super, hit podcast against Mike Elias, how he didn't believe in these Orioles at all, and now he's panicking and doing things. But I just didn't want to point out that his plan coming into this year, he certainly had a plan. And he had a team that was going to win more than the 52 games it won last year. But he certainly had a plan this year. And that plan was going to be stuck to whether the Orioles were going to win 50 games or whether the Orioles were going to win 70 games. But he didn't plan for the Orioles to win 85 or maybe more games and be in the hunt in mid-August. So let's start with DL Hall, because the handling of DL Hall this weekend really made me think about this topic as a whole. Now, we know Hall, it was announced he was going to come up and make his major league debut. That was announced Friday. He gets activated on Saturday, and he makes the start. Varying results, 5 runs over 3 2/3. Wasn't his best outing. Did strike out 6 batters. And the Orioles, it had been reported that they were planning on putting him in the bullpen after that. So everyone thought, okay, he's going to come up and start. I was fully behind this, as I talked about on this podcast yesterday. You get him his major league debut when he knows he's going to pitch. He knows he's coming up. He's pitching on this certain day. And then because of the crazy good stuff, fastball up to 100, sweeping slider, wipeout slider, you put him in the bullpen in a playoff race for the rest of the year. And I thought that made perfect sense. I thought the Orioles were going to handle that very well. And then instead, they optioned DL Hall back to AAA after the game. And the reasoning was that they wanted to get him acclimated to a bullpen role in AAA. And then when the 15 days were up, which takes us all the way to August 29th, when he could come back to the big leagues, then he would as a reliever, and he would help the Oriole bullpen in September. And while I get that, I didn't really get, as I talked about yesterday, why they would have to move him to the bullpen in AAA, why they just couldn't put him in the bullpen in the majors right now and have him adjust to that role in kind of some low leverage spots early and then ease him into being a big piece of the bullpen. And, there was probably a different initial plan for DL Hall. Now, I think it hurt that he had, those 3 or 4 starts that went horribly. It's different parts of the season, probably delayed him getting the big leagues. They wanted him to have a better start in AAA right before he came to the bigs. But you have to think, if the Orioles are truly a bad team, if they were a bad team again this year, even if they're better than the 52 and 110, if they're still a team out of the race, you have to think they either, even if they did call him up right now, even if they did in a, let's say, an alternate universe when the Orioles are bad this year, even if they did call him up to make that start on August 13th, you would think they would either keep him in the rotation for the rest of the year because they're a bad team. The wins and losses still don't matter. And you want to get a look at DL Hall as a starter through the rest of the season in kind of some lower leverage spots because he's pitching for a bad team. Or you would say, well, the Orioles have been bad all year. There's not as much pressure to bring up the top prospects. We leave him in AAA for the rest of the year, work on what he wants to work on, and he competes for a spot in spring training next year. That seems to be the plan, or what was probably the plan for Mike Elias. And I would have to say the plan may have been all along, get him up into the rotation when we think he's ready, hopefully in August, and then just keep him in the rotation the rest of the year. But the Orioles being good has changed that plan. That's kind of my point here, is that did they get a little flustered by the O's being this good? Because when you are this good and you have a dominant bullpen and you have a starting rotation that needs help, but has been good enough at times, and when you have a guy in DL Hall who has this electric stuff, doesn't know where it's going sometimes, and needs a little more seasoning before he's ready to be a good major league starting pitcher, but could be a crazy good weapon out of the bullpen. He's always been talked about. We've talked about it on this pod, how even the floor for him as a major leaguer is a really good late inning reliever because of that crazy stuff, a la Josh Hader. So when you're this good, you do like what the Rays maybe did with David Price or what the Cardinals did with Adam Wainwright early in his career. You bring him up and put him in the bullpen and let him throw the gas for an inning or two, and then you work him back into a starter over the next year or two. So that makes the most sense. But maybe the Orioles weren't planning on that because they just couldn't foresee a situation where the Orioles were 60 and 55 right now. Do I blame them? Well, not really, because the way they built this roster, this team was not supposed to be anywhere close to 5 games over 500 at this point. So it's just interesting to see how they seem to be tweaking the plan as they go, really for the first time. As you see Hall go back down and they say they're going to bring him back up. I mean, you look at some of the other moves. I'm sure the plan all year was to trade Trey Mancini. That seemed to be the plan no matter what. And probably to trade, whichever relievers got hot and got good. But you have to think, if the Orioles were bad, but some of their players were still performing at least similar to the way they were, yeah, they still would have traded Jordan, or they still would have traded Jorge Lopez and Trey Mancini, but I think they would have certainly dealt Jordan Lyles. And I think they would have certainly dealt Anthony Santander and maybe even Rougned Odor, maybe even Dillon Tate or Cionel Perez. But it feels like Mike Elias, I heard kind of set a price on guys like Lyles and Santander because they were important to a winning team. That price wasn't met, and Elias held on to both guys. We'd have to think, if the Orioles were bad this year, Santander is dealt, and Kyle Stowers has been in the big leagues for weeks now, playing in right field. But they had to change the plan a little bit because it was worth it to keep him. And that's what makes this so interesting, because was he supposed to have a plan for the Orioles to be this good? Yeah, I would think so. But it's pretty shocking because Elias and his team put together this roster, knowing full well they shouldn't have been a winning team, and yet they are. And we'll continue taking a look at some of the other moves and why they kind of fall into line with that theory as well coming up next. But first, got to tell you about betonline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. You can find your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, but also the NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf every single weekend. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering info, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. So head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today at BetOnline, where the game starts. So we're chatting about the Orioles shocking everyone with their record this year, including maybe their front office and Mike Elias. And talking about how Elias certainly had a plan going into this year. Not many things were going to get him to deviate from that plan. But you look at more of these moves and maybe that plan is starting to change a little bit. Because you look at a guy like Tyler Nevin, for example, who gets the start against the lefty as the Oriole DH on Monday night and goes 0 for 2 and then leaves the game for a pinch runner. Did have an RBI on an infield grounder. Jorge Mateo somehow scored on that play. It was ridiculous that he came home with the infield in, ground ball hit right to the shortstop. Mateo still scores from third. But Tyler Nevin's got a 68 WRC plus. If the Orioles are a bad team, yeah, Tyler Nevin's on the team all year. He's getting, maybe not every day, but he's getting regular playing time at third base and first base and in the outfield. He's playing against a lot of lefties, and they're getting him a full look at the major league level after his quick look at the end of last year to see what he can really be. But on a good team, you just can't really have Tyler Nevin. He's not hitting. His defense isn't elite enough to be anywhere. He's not super crazy versatile, and that roster spot can be used better, but the Orioles are kind of playing it down the middle with Nevin. He's been on the roster most of the year, but he's barely playing at all. He's on the bench most games, and he's not hitting when he does play. You look at other moves like the Brett Phillips trade. I mean, there's like two ways you can look at a Brett Phillips trade. A, you do it if you're a really bad team. You say, we think we can get Brett Phillips back to what he was at his peak with the Rays. We see that home run power. We can tweak something in the swing. We can get his hitting back. And when you add in his elite defense and his elite base running, he can help our team for years to come. We want to trade for him now while he's available. Or if you're a really good team, you say, you know what? We think Brett Phillips is more valuable than Ryan McKenna as our fourth outfielder. We want to trade for him. He's got this leadership, veteran experience. He can really play defense and run and help us off the bench. We think he's an upgrade over McKenna. But the Orioles kind of did neither. They got Phillips. They've kept McKenna. Phillips still hasn't hit. He's been in the lineup some. He's been a defensive replacement and a pinch runner, but Ryan McKenna clearly outplaying him, but they're both on the team for some reason. So it's another thing about, if the O's are bad, they probably still pick up Phillips, just try to keep him through the year, try to fix him in the offseason and have him be a fourth outfielder. But Ryan McKenna has maybe surprised the Orioles. And so they're kind of in this middle ground with a guy like Brett Phillips. And I think what a lot of this boils down to, and, this is a hard point to make succinct because you don't really know what's going on in the minds of Mike Elias and the rest of this front office, but it just seems like some of these moves that maybe he's tweaking the plan a little bit. And maybe that can be a good thing long-term, because maybe if he continues to tweak the plan and the Orioles continue to stay in the playoff race. I mean, you remember on deadline day when the Orioles dealt Trey Mancini and then dealt Jorge Lopez, Mike Elias was quoted saying he basically didn't think the Orioles were a playoff caliber team. Well, even since the deadline, the Orioles have continued to win. And Mike Elias has had multiple quotes over the past week. He's basically done a 180. He's, talked about how the Orioles are ready for liftoff to spend this offseason, but he's also talked about how he thinks this team is going to be a playoff team this year. He's completely changed, saying he, wants to help the team get to the postseason this year. So it kind of makes you think, again, trading Trey Mancini was in the plans basically no matter what this year. And he did it. But you have to think after the backlash of trading Mancini, plus, the way the team has still played well, but the way the clubhouse certainly reacted negatively. Did Elias see that and maybe just change the approach just a little and realize, okay, I can't go out and say that I don't think my team's getting to the playoffs. Maybe I can't necessarily just trade the most beloved players who's our third best hitter as our team is in a playoff race. Maybe there's something that can change here. And right now, with the plan being tweaked a little bit, things are a little bumpy, a little rusty. Maybe the DL Hall, the way they handled it wasn't the best way. Maybe the Tyler Nevin situation, the Brett Phillips situations are a little weird. Maybe the fact that Kyle Stowers, Gunnar Henderson aren't here yet is a facet of trying to switch that plan when you're in the middle of the season. But maybe, just maybe, what has happened this year between the reaction to Mancini, between this team playing well out above their heads and staying in this race, maybe it changes things for future years for Mike Elias, or maybe it just changes things down the stretch this year. And I think we're going to see Kyle Stowers no matter what, but maybe it makes us more likely to see Gunnar Henderson, or maybe it makes us more likely to see even Grayson Rodriguez in the big leagues once he's healthy again. Because Elias starting to shift and say, well, maybe this team is a playoff team. And I don't think he thought that was possible until the team basically proved it to him on the field. And hopefully, again, I see this could be a positive ending. He sees that this team is better than he ever thought it could have been, and maybe that works out well for the Orioles moving forward. But it certainly worked out well for the O's on the field Monday night with the 7-3 victory. They will go for the series win Tuesday night. Dean Kramer on the hill for the Orioles against Alek Manoah for the Blue Jays, who, the Orioles got to him a little bit in Baltimore last week. Dean Kramer looking to respond from a kind of up and down roller coaster start in Boston on Thursday. And then I'll be back with you here on the podcast for a Wednesday episode, of course, recapping game 2 between the Orioles and the Blue Jays and continuing to talk all things playoff race, all things Orioles. And later in the week, we'll continue to learn more about the Orioles draft picks as well. But again, that's all coming up starting again on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.